Hey there, and welcome to the July 2020 astrology overview video. So as we transition from the month of June through until July, we are still in a very intense and busy astrological period. Now, that being said, we haven't had a lot of planetary aspects. We are in the midst of Mercury still retrograde. But in that window, that 3-week window of time where Mercury has been retrograde. So its station retrograde, let me just remind myself here, was mid-June, around June 17. And it will be retrograde in Gemini through until the 12th of July. Even though we haven't had a lot of planetary aspects, which usually are the kind of signatures that can make for a busy period, even though we haven't had a lot of that, what we have had is some very dramatic and potent planetary ingresses and events, and some key signature events of the year of 2020. So we've had a total solar eclipse at 0 Cancer, which occurred on June 21, on the solstice. So that's a very intense and powerful event. We've had Venus station direct. We've had Neptune station retrograde. We've also had the second iteration of the Jupiter-Pluto conjunction, which is probably, for my money, the signature aspect of 2020. And we've also had Mars enter Aries. Now, that is the standout feature, I think, of July, even though it kind of went into Aries at the very end of June. So Mars in Aries, Saturn back in Capricorn is the flavor of July. So if you are catching this video on YouTube, my name is Cassandra Tyndall, and I am offering you an excerpt of a video series that I provide each and every month for members of my Golden Circle Club. So this is a membership service where I guide you through all of the astrology month to month to help guide you and help to offer you tips and tricks and how to work with the planetary energy. So if you're an astrology student, this is excellent to help you supercharge your astrology knowledge. If you're an astrology enthusiast and just want to live your life with a little bit more guidance, insight, and wisdom, it would be wonderful for you too. So if you'd like to find out more about being a part of the Golden Circle, seeing what it's all about, then you can find the link to get involved with that in the description box below. So the first of the month, 1st of July, 2nd of July, if you're in Australia, we have Saturn returning to Capricorn. And that sort of really, just super boosts this really kind of intense 3-week Mercury retrograde period. So over the last little bit, I've had quite a lot of messages come through, actually, particularly on Instagram, people saying they feel a little bit tired, they felt quite flat, and just, drained and average, particularly post-eclipse, which happened on the Cancer solstice, June 20, June 21. So while, as I said, the aspects have not been very busy, we've really been in this eclipse, what we call it, an eclipse bardo. And so this is the period of time between eclipses that can feel very cathartic. They can feel quite draining. They can feel energetically more intense and potent. Time does feel a little bit different between eclipses. And so we've had a lunar eclipse in June. So that was around 14, 15 degrees of Sagittarius. I think that might have been very early June, maybe June 5, if my memory serves me correctly. Then we had the potent solar eclipse on the solstice. And now this month we have the final, very partial lunar eclipse. So this is not only going to wind up the eclipse season, it's also going to wind up a long sort of 18 months to 2-year period of eclipses that we've had across the Cancer Capricorn axis. So we are really in this kind of crossover period where we're sort of saying goodbye to the Cancer Capricorn parts of our lives with revisits, and then also sneak peeks and previews of the next chapter. So it's kind of like we're not fully ready to move forward because we haven't fully finished what's been in the background. So there's 2 things I'm really going to focus on this month, and that is the Aries ingress, and which did happen in June, as I mentioned, and Saturn in Capricorn. So what's unique about Mars in Aries with this particular transit is that a once in every 2-year tour, if you like, Mars in Aries, which usually lasts 6 weeks, this particular one is going to last well over 6 months, 6 to 7 months. So Mars went into Aries around June 28, where it will stay until I think it's January 6 of 2021. So Mars in Aries is something we're all going to get very up close and personal with and have our, if we weren't too sure what Mars in Aries was about coming into this cycle, we're certainly going to know what it means coming out of it. So that being said, Mars in Aries, while it does have such a long time in the sign, I would probably sort of divide that up into 3 parts. So I'm just going to quickly overview those for you. So the first part is a little bit more like a pure Mars in Aries influence. The second part is the retrograde, which is September, October, November. And then, of course, the final few months from November through to January. And so, but speaking of July, it is the July overview video. This really is a month where you can just say yes to things that excite you. Mars is not going to be hindered or sort of pressed down too much by any other planetary aspects this month. Yes, it will be in a sign-based aspect to Saturn. So Saturn in Capricorn does square Mars in Aries. But I think for the first part of this cycle, that's not going to be an influence that is particularly potent or noticeable. The reason for that is that Saturn has been retrograding from Aquarius, then dipping back into Capricorn. So it's in those very, very late degrees for the majority of this month. So it's really only going from about 0 Aquarius this month to 27. So it's really only moving 3 degrees. And Mars is just starting to pick up the pace at the other end of Aries. So the gap is quite wide for the majority of this month. So I don't feel, while it's kind of there, maybe in the background, it's not going to be a pressure cooker type of influence. So I feel that pretty much up until the 25th to the 26th, once Mars enters its pre-retrograde shadow, which is the set of degrees that Mars will eventually go, oh, hang on a minute, I've got to redo something here, which will start in September, October, November. Mars starts to enter those degrees. And so that's where the expression of Mars will change. But for the majority of July, we do have a more pure iteration of Mars, where we can be a little bit more assertive, where we can be more confident, maybe embrace some healthy selfishness. So with the state of the world and the state of 2020 so far, I'm sure where we are at right now at the start of July is very different to where we each collectively thought we would be at the start of January. So you might want to revisit something that fires you up or gets you passionate about something that, Mars in Aries does love something that is fresh, something that's exciting, something that's, can get your mojo running, if you like. So you might want to dive headfirst into some action. Mars is a hot, dry planet in a hot, dry sign. So there's not a lot of time between deciding and doing. So this can be really good to get your mojo running around a particular goal, a pleasure pursuit, something to do with healthy selfishness, or starting to really get fired up about something that it is that you really want. Mars in Aries is exceptionally hot-headed. It doesn't really think about consequences too much. It just dives straight into action. It's that simple case of just do it, decide and do is very Mars in Aries. Like a soldier, for instance, there's a mission to accomplish. It doesn't think, it doesn't strategize, it doesn't plan. It's just like, yep, and gone. So that's kind of the energy that we can start really embracing a little bit in July. So, Mars in of itself is what we refer to, astrologically speaking, as a malefic. So it can bring, it's not a harmonizing influence. Mars is the planet of war, strife, conflict, aggression. So it can bring some contests, in a sporting situation, in a political situation, or even in a romantic situation. Mars stirs the pot. Mars, doesn't, where Venus, for example, wants to harmonize and bring together, Mars doesn't care about that. Mars just wants what Mars wants. And that is doubled down in the sign of Aries. So having a malefic planet in a sign that it rules, it really depends on how depends on how you're looking at things. Does it make Mars maybe a better expression of Mars, or does it actually make it worse? This really depends on what side of the fence that you're on, because Mars really wants to win at all costs. It wants to come first at all costs. So if you are the winner or the victor in a certain situation, that's fantastic for you. But if you're not, if you're on the losing end of the situation, then Mars in Aries doesn't feel so great. So even though on paper, Mars in Aries has a pretty decent pedigree, in reality, it really just does depend on, what receiving end you're on. That being said, Mars is what we refer to in astrology as a nocturnal planet. So it has a little bit more strength if you're born at nighttime. Or when I say nighttime, I mean if you look at your birth chart and the sun is below the horizon, so below that ascendant-descendant axis. But in Aries, even though it's a rulership, Aries is the daytime expression of Mars. So Aries is a yang or a diurnal type of sign. It's yang, it's assertive, it's a pushing forward type of energy. And so that's a little bit less comfortable for Mars in Scorpio, even though they both are ruled by the same planet, Aries and Scorpio. And so one of the ways I often describe the difference between Mars in Aries versus Mars in Scorpio is that Mars in Aries is very indiscriminate. It's very impulsive and it's very reactive. Conversely, Mars in a fixed water sign of Scorpio, it's a lot more reserved. It's a lot more cautious. It's more strategic. It plans its strike. And so I'll often describe, Mars in Aries as the gladiator, and Mars in Scorpio maybe like the ninja that would hide in the shadows and wait for that perfect time to strike, if you like. So Mars in Aries is, even though it's in domicile or rulership, it's at home. It's pretty happy, but it's not its most best expression of being at home. So it is a little bit of out of its element, so to speak. And so sometimes when that can happen, there can be a tendency to overcompensate. So maybe overdo confidence or overdo the sense of I can do this by myself, or I can do this alone. Or even perhaps thinking that you've got like more bravado or more power behind you than you really have. So speaking of gladiators, I had a little bit of a look to see, okay, well, who's got some Mars and Aries action in their own chart? And lo and behold, Russell Crowe actually does, and he was the actor that played the gladiator. So some other people that have Mars and Aries, just to kind of help you tune in to the energy of what this planet in this sign is all about. So we've got Russell Crowe, we've got Clint Eastwood, we've got Daniel Craig, and if you're not sure who that is, that's the new version of James Bond. We've also got Conor McGregor, who is a MMA fighter, Cristiano Ronaldo. So, we've got sort of action figures, sporting players. Also, Alexander Ludwig, who is from the TV show The Vikings. We've got Angelina Jolie. And, you know, I remember back when she was younger, she used to wear a vial of blood of her boyfriend or husband's around her neck. So very Martian. We've got Bernie Sanders. And so he will also be somebody who will be interesting to observe what happens for him over this next 6 months, because he's also born with Mars retrograde in Aries, which is where Mars will, you know, it's what Mars is doing this time. We've also got some musicians who are pretty powerful, and that is Prince. We've got Ella Fitzgerald, who's an eternal, wonderful voice, Iggy Pop, and a couple of my personal favorites, Maynard James Keenan. If you don't know who that is, that's from the band Tool. And Corey Taylor is Slipknot and Stone Sour. Just, you know, a little bit of my musical tastes there. So because, as I mentioned, Mars is largely inhibited by, you know, the influence of, you know, Saturn, Jupiter and Pluto, which will happen, but not in July, this is a good time, you know, in July to boldly strike out or step up in a new direction or something, you know, that you really want. And even if that means that maybe you have to go it alone or you don't have the support that you may have hoped you've had or that you actually wanted. And sometimes there's that feeling there, you know, if you want something done, do it yourself. And that's a very Mars and Aries kind of thing. So again, this month, if you want something, it might be a case of just having to go it alone. As July ends, as I mentioned, that's going to shift and change as Mars enters that shadow period. And so that will be when Mars hits around 15 degrees on the 25th to 26th. And this will be where we may start to get that proverbial spanner in the works. Things that were moving fast, swiftly, and with, you know, relative speed are starting to slow down. What you'll see in the sky too is Mars in the nighttime will start to become visible. So Mars's retrograde period is different to what we experience with Mercury and Venus because it's getting closer to the opposition of the sun when it's retrograde. Not there yet, of course. That will happen in September once the sun's in Libra, late Virgo Libra. But when Mars is retrograde, it gets closer to us and it gets a whole lot brighter. So you'll be able to observe that in the night sky coming up. And it is quite an eerie kind of vibe when we can really see Mars lighting up the night sky for a majority of the night. So once we get to the end of July, you know, as much as Mars and Aries can, and it may not be easy, it might be wise if you can just to knock it back a gear a little bit, to think about, you know, the choices you've made so far in July. The swift pace might sort of, you know, come back a little bit, you know, go down a little bit. And a variety of options that are offered or things you've been chasing or things that you're doing, you know, you may get an inkling at where it's like, oh, okay, I've got to maybe decide, you know, what I want like long term versus what I want now. And that's going to be a really big theme, in my opinion, in the months coming up. It might be a case of having to sacrifice some short-term goals for the longer-term goals because of the Saturn in Capricorn, Mars in Aries paradigm. So that leads me through to Saturn now. And so Saturn in Capricorn is going to trump Mars in Aries for sure. I read somewhere online, I don't know who said it, maybe it was on Twitter or something like that. Somebody said in a game of rock, paper, scissors, Saturn always wins. And so when Saturn, you know, is now back in Capricorn, and so this may also bring an iteration of theme, particularly if you're experiencing a Saturn return. So if you're born between January 6, 1959, January 3, 1962, so in that period of time, you will be having the second part or the final chapter of your Saturn return. If you are in the more recent version of Saturn in Capricorn, apart from the one we've just had, which those dates, so if your birthday falls between February 16, 1998, June 11, 1998, and then of course Saturn retrograde a little bit and came back into Capricorn 13th of November 1988 for its a longer term stay until 7th of February 1991. So if your birthdays fall between those dates, then you will have a little bit more to go of your Saturn return. So just when you thought it was over, you might have to revisit or reopen a chapter, tie up some loose ends, themes from the last couple of years. So when Saturn first came into Capricorn in December 2017, there may be, some things to go over, some things that become more apparent, you thought were done and dusted, or it might just be sort of the icing on the cake if you've had a really positive Saturn return. So that can be true. I've seen people get married over the last couple of years and sort of recently announced, that they're pregnant. So, that can sometimes happen too. It doesn't always have to be, really hard. Saturn returns can be exceptionally positive and beneficial and wonderful, but Saturn is Saturn. And so even those really good things don't always come with ease. They come with the work. And so this is going to be, something that you may feel, that will come back into your world again. And this is also going to be true if you've got planets in from around 29 to about 24, 25 of the other cardinal signs. And so that's Aries, Cancer, Libra, and of course Capricorn too. One positive thing to keep in mind if you do fall in this category and you are a little bit concerned about, oh no, Saturn in Capricorn again, is that yes, while Saturn will it will have a lot of things to say, if you like, in the second half of this year, it won't be co-present with the South Node. So there's this feeling here, because the South Node's now in Sagittarius, so there's this like vibe or this feeling here where maybe what was lost in 2019, for instance, maybe something that was really drained you or something that kind of really pared back things, the Marie Kondo, physically, emotionally, financially, what have you. So whatever was kind of very cleaned up or cleaned out or pared or stripped right back has really given you a fresh foundation to rebuild from. And so this second iteration of Saturn in Capricorn can really help you do that. So from this fresh point, from this ground zero, it's like, okay, this old chestnut again, but I can do it in a more of a rebuild phase, so to speak. So hopefully, if you are falling in that category, the late degrees of cardinal signs, or in that second Saturn return, that helps you sort of think, or, if you are feeling a little bit worried about what might lie ahead. So July as a month, it really does set the stage for the rest of 2020. So we've got Mars in Aries. It's going to be there until the beginning of 2021. We've got Saturn in Capricorn, which will be there, I think, until about the 17th, 18th of December. So it is what it is kind of for now. We will get different sort of peaks and troughs of the cycle. But my advice for July is don't put off until tomorrow what can be done today. Get to work. Get to work what's important to you. Don't procrastinate. These are strong. July is a heavy, front-loaded cardinal energy. It's decide and do, come back and figure out the details later. You may also go faster if you go alone. And this doesn't mean you have to break up with anybody. It doesn't mean you have to not care about anybody after all. But if you're waiting on somebody's approval or cooperation or support or help, you probably are not going to get that. And the nature of Mars and Saturn, it's a hot, dry planet with a cold and dry. So we've got excessive cold and excessive heat with force over these next 6 months. And, that's how diamonds are made, okay, with excessive heat and excessive force. So do keep that in the back of your mind. Mercury is still retrograde as we enter the month in Cancer, and it will be until about the 12th, but it is in Cancer for the rest of July. So it might be helped to just keep in mind what's the sentimental things or what's really important from a more primal or emotional place and act on that. So choices that are made in July could potentially have longer term implications as well. The work that seems kind of easy maybe at the beginning, it's like, yeah, Mars is in Aries, let's go and save this money or do this thing, lose the 10 kilos, or let's just go for all the things. We may get towards the end of July and realize, oh, that's going to be a little bit more work than what I initially anticipated. So be mindful that there's a short-term goal and a long-term goal, and they're going to kind of go head to head with each other coming in the next several months. But if you really want something, even if it's something that is pleasurable or something that is nice or something that's happy, those things still take work. Okay, so, and even diamonds take a whole lot of work to dig out of the ground, polish up, shine up, and enjoy in a way that we generally do. So that's the overview for July. I hope that's helped you to give you some food for thought to navigate the month ahead. And if you love this video, please leave me a comment or a like, share it with your friends. And of course, you're more than welcome to join us each and every month in the Golden Circle Club. It'd be great to have you there.